we have to go back a little bit and see about this dense mold in which we have been made, this clay figure. And that dense mold, he says, hardly too close beset by the world's care, can the dense mold in which we have been made return sheer joy to joy, pure light to light. It's a very difficult thing, isn't it? We, living in the duality, we go from joy to sorrow, from light to darkness, or at least shadow, confusion. So we see that the next lines, which I have to get for the next page, we see here 2 lines. For its tormented will to think and live, first to a mingled pain and pleasure woke. And so we see this again, this duality of pain and pleasure. It woke, and what did it do? We have to see now here. And still it keeps the habit of its birth. A dire duality is our way to be. This is what Mother and Sri Aurobindo are trying to break down. And the supermind can do it more easily than anything else, to allow us to rise to those higher levels of spiritual mind, beginning with the higher mind, which sees everything from a totally different perspective. It still does see duality. Until we can get to the overmind, we will see some duality, but we will see the duality in a different way. So now he's going to tell us about the earth and the crude beginnings of this mortal world. In the crude beginnings of this mortal world, life was not, nor mind's play, nor heart's desire. Yes, everything was inert matter. Inert matter had no life in it. Mind certainly was not there, nor bhakti, the heart's desire. So he says, when earth was built in the unconscious void, and nothing was save a material scene, identified with sea and sky and stone, her young gods yearned for the release of souls asleep in objects, vague, inanimate. Well, what are these souls? They are aspects of the divine being that these young gods want to be released. So there is maybe not a consciousness in the stone, but there is certainly the divine presence. And so these souls asleep in objects, vague, inanimate. So these young gods, these initial gods who are part of the primal creation, have a yearning for these souls to be released. Now, he goes on and says, in that desolate grandeur, in that beauty bare, in the deaf stillness, mid the unheeded sounds, heavy was the uncommunicated load of Godhead in a world that had no needs. Now we know that Godhead is all the universe, but the next line tells us, for none was there to feel or to receive. Everything was inanimate. Everything was without life, without mind, was just body of mass. And then he'll continue. This solid mass, which brooked no throb of sense, could not contain their vast creative urge. I'd like to stop here because the word brooked is very interesting. Brooked here is to put up with something, to tolerate something. So this solid mass, which brooked no throb of sense, could not contain their vast creative urge, immersed no more in matter's harmony. Interesting word. The spirit lost its statuesque repose. What does this mean, immersed no more in matter's harmony? Well, when there is no mind and there is no life, there is no disharmony in matter either. It's just a form of substance of being. And that form of substance is the material universe. But within it, there is a spirit and the movement of the spirit. And so matter is only so much mobile energy vibrating intensely into form. Sri Aurobindo writes in essays in philosophy and yoga. So therefore the spirit lost its statuesque repose, statuesque sort of massive or majestic dignity, grace, or beauty. And losing that, the next line tells us, in the uncaring trance, it groped for sight, passioned for the movements of a conscious heart, famishing for speech and thought and joy and love. In the dumb, insensitive wheeling day and night, hungered for the beat of yearning and response. So there is this aspiration that the spirit wants. It's groping for sight in this trance state, this almost hypnotic or cataleptic or ecstatic state of nothingness. And it's groping for sight. Groping is searching blindly, uncertainty. And it even passioned for the movements of a conscious heart. To passion is to be affected, I think, by intense emotions. It's not passion, as we say, of desire or lust or anger. It's sort of more affected by intense emotions. And it wants the movements of this conscious heart. It's even famishing, that's starving, famishing for speech and thought and joy and love. Where? In the dumb, insensitive wheeling day and night, hungered for the beat of yearning and response. So this wheeling day and night, of course, is the cosmos, but it's dumb, it's silent. And this spirit is hungering for this beat of something that yearns and it wants a response. And therefore, in the next line, he says, the poised in conscience, shaken with a touch. Wow. The intuitive silence, trembling with a name. They cried to life, to invade the senseless mold, and in brute forms awake divinity. Now, these four lines are extremely important for us to look at closely because this inconscience, which is also the divine, and it's the opposite of the supreme superconscious, but it has lost itself. And therefore, it is shaken with a touch. The intuitive silence, trembling with a name. The intuitive, that's the perceptive spiritual vision or perception. It's intuitive, it's not reasoning or it's not observation, it's an intuitive silence. Notice that he capitalizes silence. And he says that silence is a state in which either there is no movement of the mind or vital, or else a great stillness which no surface movement can pierce or alter. Now, that's extremely important because this is an intuitive silence. And that silence is trembling with a name and therefore cries to life to invade the senseless mold. Well, the senseless mold is without any sense, without any meaning, purposeless, devoid of sensation or consciousness. And in brute forms awake divinity. These brute forms could be the animals, man, a voice was heard on the mute, rolling globe. A murmur moaned in the unlistening void. So something is happening here. A voice is heard on this mute. Again, mute is the same as dumb here. Absolutely silent, rolling globe. Obviously, the earth is the rolling globe. A murmur moaned in the unlistening void. So there is a murmur, there's an aspiration for life to come into this insentient matter. And then after that full stop, he says, a being seemed to breathe where once was none. He doesn't say it breathed already. He says it seemed to breathe where once was none. And then he says, something pent up in dead, insentient depths, denied conscious existence, lost to joy, turned as if one asleep since dateless time. Whoa. So here we're getting back into Book 1, Canto 1, again, where Sri Aurobindo has told us about this big creation happening. So we see that there's a murmur that moaned in the unlistening void. We see that a being seemed to breathe where once was none. Something pent up. Pent up is confined, restrained, curbed almost, in dead, insentient depths, denied conscious existence, lost to joy, turned as if one asleep since dateless time. So we know that millions and millions of years must have passed before the advent of consciousness of any sort, before life has entered the physical plane. And we see that aware of its own buried reality, remembering its forgotten self and right, it yearned to know, to aspire, to enjoy, to live. Oh, so fantastic. So this, what seemed to be pent up and dead in sentient depths, this being that seemed to breathe where there was nothing, this voice that was heard on the globe, this murmur moaning in the unlistening void, remembered its forgotten self because it became aware of its own buried reality. And therefore, it yearned to know, to aspire, to enjoy, to live. So here we have knowledge, we have aspiration, we have enjoyment or pleasure, and we have life. Those things it is yearning for. So I have to go to the next page, which will just take me a moment, and we'll get here. Life heard the call and left her native light. Life, of course, was living in light. Everything was living in light. But here on the earth, everything was as if dead. We can't even say tamasic. We would have to say inert, inconscient. Now, Sri Aurobindo is going to pick up this thread here. Life heard the call and left her native light. Now, what is happening to life here? Overflowing from her bright, magnificent plain on the rigid coil and sprawl of mortal space, here too, the gracious, great-winged angel poured her splendor and her swiftness and her bliss, hoping to fill a fair new world with joy. We have to look at this phrase, the gracious, great-winged angel. When I asked Jumur about this, she says, it is the very principle of life, which is a projection and emanation of the divine force. Wings symbolize freedom of movement, joining various planes, and the coming down of the angel, bringing the divine principles with her. Alok said, the gracious great-winged angel is the Godhead of life, one of the four principal powers that emerged from the one divine consciousness. When this angel descends upon the hard soil of earth, here too he fills it with sweetness and joy, for such is its spell upon all things. So we have that marvelous line, hoping to fill a fair new world with joy. Now, Sri Aurobindo is going to give us another image. As comes a goddess to a mortal's breast and fills his days with her celestial clasp, she stooped to make her home in transient shapes. In matter's womb, she cast the immortal's fire. In the unfeeling vast, woke thought and hope. Smote with her charm and beauty, flesh and nerve, and forced delight on earth's insensible frame. Oh, a lot to look at here. So, it's like a goddess has come to the mortal's breast and filled his days with her celestial heavenly clasp. Now, what did she do? Well, she stooped to make her home in transient shapes. And we know that humanity, as it is now, is transient. It's between the animal and the supermind. And so man is a transient being. He passes with time. He remains in place for only a brief time. And so this goddess stoops to make her home in these transient shapes, these beings. In matter's womb, she casts the immortal's fire. So here we see that matter, of course, we know matter as the structure of energy, but matter prior to the divine influx was absolutely still, as if dead. And we can't say that the divine force was not in matter, but it was unmoving. It was not even lethargic. It was absolutely empty, still. And so this goddess comes to matter's womb and casts in that womb the immortal's fire. So now we see what is happening here. In the unfeeling vast, woke thought and hope. Oh, so because she has cast, of course, the immortal's fire into this unfeeling vast, naturally thought woke and hope woke. And what else happened? She smote with her charm and beauty, flesh and nerve. To smite, smote is the past tense of smite. It usually means to inflict on someone a heavy blow, to strike. But here it's more to imbue, to impress, to put on suddenly with a forcible effect. So we can see that she smote with her charm and beauty, flesh and nerve, and forced delight on earth's insensible frame. And now comes one of my most beautiful and beloved passages. Alive and clad with trees and herbs and flowers, earth's great brown body smiled towards the skies. Azure replied to azure in the sea's laugh. New sentient creatures filled the unseen depths. Life's glory and swiftness ran in the beauty of beasts. Man dared and thought and met with his soul the world. How beautiful. Earth is now alive and clad, that means dressed with, covered with trees and herbs and flowers. And this great brown body of earth is smiling towards the skies. Remember Sri Aurobindo's words to Dilip Kumar Roy, the earth is a conscious being, and the world is only the form it takes to manifest. So we see that along with these trees and these herbs and flowers, azure replied to azure in the sea's laugh. Now, azure is the light shade of blue, resembling the color of the clear sky in the daytime. There's a semicolon there because Sri Aurobindo wants to tell us so much more about this entry of the goddess, the divine light, the sun, the creatrix. New sentient creatures filled the unseen depths. Sentient, of course, is conscious creatures. Life's glory and swiftness ran in the beauty of peace. Man dared and thought and met with his soul the world. Now, how beautiful. But something happens here that's very, very sad, actually. But while the magic breath was on its way, before her gifts could reach our prisoned hearts, a dark, ambiguous presence questioned all. When something is ambiguous, it's questionable, it's indistinct, it's obscure, it's not clearly defined. And this presence, note capital P on presence. It's a dark presence and it's an ambiguous presence that questioned all. Now, presence is usually understood here as a divine, spiritual being, force, etc. So, Sri Aurobindo tells us that it is intended by the word presence to indicate the sense and perception of the divine as a being, felt as present in one's existence and consciousness, or in relation with it, without the necessity of any further qualification or description. But we see here this is an ambiguous presence, and it's dark because it's questioning everything. And then he tells us more about this presence. He calls it a secret will. The secret will, note the capital W, that robes itself with night. So it covers itself with night, but it's still the secret will. What does it do? And offers to spirit the ordeal of the flesh, imposed a mystic mask of death and pain. And this is our earth, and this is what we have to transcend. Of course, there are many yogic practices that simply want to reach nirvana and leave the earth because they see that this death and pain is either an illusion or a falsehood. So I will stop there, I think, for today because there's a lot more to go. Could someone read the entire for us with a good voice and feeling of the beauty that is coming, that has descended upon the earth, the aspiration that came through, so this divine presence could enter, and we'll begin with the very beginning. There's so much more that I could share with you, but for today we'll leave that. And can we begin, someone? In the crude beginnings. Who is that?
Preetu.
Okay, please.
Too near to suffering worlds his nature lived, and where he stood were entrances of night. Hardly too close beset by the world's care, can the dense mold in which we have been made return sheer joy to joy, pure light to light. for its tormented will to think and live, first to a mingled pain and pleasure woke. And still it keeps the habit of its birth. A dire duality is our old way to be. In the crude beginnings of this mortal world, life was not nor mind's play nor heart's desire. When earth was built in the unconscious void, and nothing was save a material scene, identified with sea and sky and stone, her young gods yearned for the release of souls. Asleep in objects vague, inanimate, in that desolate grandeur, in that beauty bare, in the deaf stillness, mid the unheeded sounds. Heavy was the uncommunicated load of Godhead in a world that had no needs. For none was there to feel or to receive. The solid mass which brooked no throb of sense could not contain their vast creative urge. Immersed no more in matter's harmony, the spirit lost its repose.
Statuesque.
Statuesque repose. In the uncaring trance, it groped for sight, fastened for the movements of conscious heart.
Of a conscious heart.
Of a conscious heart. Famishing for speech and thought and joy and love, in the dumb, insensitive wheeling day and night. Hungered for the beat of yearning and response, poised in conscience, shaken with a touch. The intuitive silence trembling with the name, they cried to life to invade the senseless mold and in brute forms awake divinity. A voice was heard on the mute rolling globe. A murmur moaned in the unlistening void. Something pent up in dead insentient depths, denied conscious existence, lost to joy, turned as if one asleep in stateless time, aware of its own buried reality, remembering its forgotten self and right. It yearned to know, to aspire, to enjoy, to live. Life heard the call and left her native light, overflowing from her bright, magnificent plain on the rigid coil and sprawl of mortal space. Here too the gracious, great-winged angel poured, her splendor and her swiftness and her bliss, hoping to fill a fair new world with joy, as comes a goddess to a mortal's breast, and fills his days with a celestial clasp. She stooped to make her home in transient shapes. In matter's womb she cast the immortal's fire. In the unfeeling vast woke thought and hope. Smote with her charm and beauty flesh and nerve, and forced delight on earth's insensible frame. Alive and clad with trees and herbs and flowers, earth's great brown body smiled towards the skies. Azure replied to azure in the sea's laugh. New sentient creatures filled the unseen depths. Life's glory and swiftness run in the beauty of beasts. Men dared in thought and met with his soul the world.
Thank you, Preeti. I would like to suggest to you. Your reading of each line is fairly good, but you are not connecting the thoughts. You have to keep in mind Sri Aurobindo's full sentences, his commas, his semicolons, his colons, his full stops. And so when you end a line with something that sounds like a full stop, you miss the next line that Sri Aurobindo is sharing with us. So I'd like you to work on that for the future.
Thank you.
Thank you for reading. Yes, thank you so much. So I will say namaste to all of you.